Hey guys, welcome back to the Atlas Archives. Tonight we're visiting a place where pearls once bought palaces and oil now fuels dreams. Welcome to Kuwait, a nation that's mastered the art of reinventing itself every few centuries. I'm your guide through the Atlas Archives, and we're about to explore how a small patch of desert became one of the world's wealthiest countries, survived an invasion that made international headlines, and is now planning its next dramatic transformation. Picture this: a country smaller than New Jersey that holds more proven oil reserves than Russia. That's Kuwait, where the phrase punching above your weight was probably invented, assuming anyone had time to invent phrases while counting petroleum revenues. From ancient trading posts to pearl diving dynasties, from British protectorates to modern mega projects, Kuwait's story reads like someone took a history textbook and decided it needed more plot twists. Tonight, we'll discover how the Al-Sabah family turned pragmatic leadership into an art form, why Kuwait Bay became the most coveted harbour in the Gulf, and how a country that was literally on fire in 1991 is now planning to build one of the world's tallest towers. If you're ready to explore how geography, oil, and remarkably savvy diplomacy created one of the Middle East's most fascinating success stories, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you won't want to miss where this journey takes us next. So grab your favourite blanket, settle in, and let's begin our deep dive into Kuwait. Chapter 1: Geographic Foundation and Ancient Origins. Kuwait sits at the northwestern edge of the Persian Gulf, occupying a strategic position that has made it a crossroads of civilizations for millennia. The country covers approximately 17,918 square kilometers, making it roughly the size of New Jersey, though considerably more sandy and with significantly fewer diners serving questionable coffee at 3 in the morning. To put this in perspective, you could fit about 4 Kuwaits into South Korea, or alternatively, Kuwait could comfortably nestle into the state of Wyoming approximately 14 times, though one imagines the cowboys might have some concerns about the sudden appearance of oil derricks on their rangeland. The nation's borders touch Iraq to the north and west, stretching for approximately 240 kilometers, while the southern boundary with Saudi Arabia extends for roughly 222 kilometers. The eastern coastline stretches along the Persian Gulf for approximately 499 kilometers, creating a maritime frontier that has been Kuwait's lifeline throughout history, connecting it to trading networks that span from India to the Mediterranean. This coastline is punctuated by several bays and inlets, with Kuwait Bay forming the natural harbour that would become the heart of the nation's commercial empire. The bay itself is a masterpiece of natural engineering, providing shelter from storms while offering easy access to the open waters of the Gulf. The landscape of Kuwait is predominantly flat and arid, characterized by what geologists politely call gently undulating terrain, which is essentially academic speak for mostly flat with the occasional bump. The topography rises gradually from sea level at the character, coast to its highest elevations in the southwest and west. The highest point in the country is an unnamed hill in the western region, reaching a modest 294 meters above sea level. This peak is so unremarkable that it doesn't even have a proper name, which seems rather unfair. Imagine being the tallest thing in your entire country and still being referred to as that hill over there. Even more insulting, some maps simply mark it with a number, as if it were just another item in a very boring inventory list. The terrain can be broadly divided into several distinct regions. The coastal plain extends inland for approximately 50 to 60 kilometers, characterized by flat, sandy surfaces occasionally interrupted by low ridges. This is where most of Kuwait's population has historically clustered, drawn by the relatively easy access to both the sea and the precious freshwater resources. Moving inland, the landscape transitions into what geographers call the interior plateau. Though calling it a plateau might be giving it more credit than it deserves, it's really just slightly higher flat land with pretensions. The western and southwestern regions feature a series of low ridges and escarpments, the most notable being the Jal Az-Zor escarpment in the north. These ridges, while modest by international standards, represent the most dramatic topographical features in Kuwait. They rise to heights of approximately 145 metres, making them positively alpine by local standards. The ridges are composed primarily of limestone and sandstone, carved by millennia of wind erosion into shapes that early travellers often described as resembling sleeping camels or, in the case of one particularly creative 19th century explorer, a herd of enormous bread loaves left to rise too long in the desert sun. The climate is classified as hot desert, with scorching summers where temperatures regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius and occasionally flirt with the 55-degree mark. The heat is so intense that it has been known to melt the soles of shoes, leading to the peculiar sight of visitors hopping from air-conditioned building to air-conditioned building, like particularly well-dressed kangaroos. During the peak summer months of June through September, the combination of extreme heat and high humidity can make the air feel thick enough to slice with a knife, assuming, of course, that the knife doesn't melt first. Winters are mercifully mild and brief, lasting from December to February, when temperatures drop to a pleasant range between 8 and 20 degrees Celsius, practically Arctic conditions by local standards. Kuwaitis have been known to don heavy coats when temperatures dip below 20 degrees, creating amusing scenes for visitors from colder climates who find themselves sweating in t-shirts while locals bundle up as if preparing for a polar expedition. The spring months of March through May offer perhaps the most pleasant weather, with temperatures hovering around 30 degrees and occasional gentle breezes that locals celebrate with the enthusiasm typically reserved for major holidays. Rainfall is scarce and irregular, averaging about 120 millimetres annually, though this average is somewhat misleading since precipitation varies dramatically from year to year. Some years might see as little as 25 millimetres, while others might receive as much as 300 millimetres, usually delivered in a handful of dramatic downpours that transform the landscape overnight. When it does rain, it often comes in sudden, intense bursts that can transform the normally placid wadis, dry riverbeds, into raging torrents. These flash floods are dramatic affairs, turning the desert briefly into a landscape that might charitably be described as moist. The spectacle is so unusual that Kuwaitis have been known to drive considerable distances just to witness the rare sight of flowing water, treating these events rather like meteorological entertainment. The lack of permanent rivers or freshwater lakes has shaped human settlement patterns throughout Kuwait's history, making the discovery and management of groundwater sources a matter of life and death. The country's water table is relatively shallow in some areas, fed by underground aquifers that extend across the Arabian Peninsula. These aquifers represent the accumulated rainfall of thousands of years, slowly percolating through rock layers to create underground reservoirs that early inhabitants learned to tap with remarkable ingenuity. The geology beneath Kuwait tells a story of ancient seas and geological patience that would make even the most dedicated procrastinator feel ashamed. The bedrock consists primarily of sedimentary rocks laid down over millions of years when this region lay beneath prehistoric oceans. These layers contain the fossilized remains of marine creatures, creating what geologists call a library written in limestone. Though it's the sort of library where all the books are about dead fish and take millions of years to check out. The sedimentary layers tell the story of countless cycles of marine transgression and regression, periods when ancient seas advanced and retreated across what is now Kuwait, leaving behind deposits of limestone, sandstone and shale. More importantly for modern Kuwait, these geological processes created the oil reserves that would transform the nation in the 20th century. The petroleum lies trapped in porous limestone formations, sealed beneath layers of impermeable rock in what geologists call structural traps. These underground reservoirs formed over millions of years as organic matter from ancient marine life was buried, heated, and transformed under pressure into crude oil. It's rather poetic that the ancient seas that once covered this land would ultimately provide the wealth that would allow modern Kuwait to flourish, nature's own version of a very long-term investment strategy, though one with considerably better returns than most retirement accounts. Archaeological evidence suggests that human habitation in the Kuwait region dates back approximately 8,000 years, though some recent discoveries hint at even earlier occupation. The earliest settlers were likely nomadic groups who recognized the value of the coastal location for both fishing and seasonal grazing. These ancient inhabitants left behind scattered evidence of their presence. Pottery fragments decorated with simple geometric patterns, stone tools crafted from local flint, and the remnants of fishing settlements along what was then a different coastline. The Persian Gulf was smaller during these early periods, with sea levels significantly lower than today, meaning that many of the earliest settlements now lie beneath the waters of the modern Gulf. The Bronze Age brought more sophisticated settlements to the region, with evidence of trade connections extending far beyond the immediate area. Pottery shards found in Kuwait show stylistic influences from Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and even distant Anatolia, suggesting that even 4,000 years ago, this small corner of the Arabian Peninsula was connected to vast trading networks. The inhabitants of Bronze Age Kuwait were clearly skilled craftspeople, producing distinctive red-burnished pottery and copper tools that have been found in archaeological sites across the Persian Gulf region. The ancient Greeks knew this region as part of what they called the Characene, a Hellenistic kingdom that controlled the mouth of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers and served as a crucial link between the Greek world and the riches of India and the Far East. Greek geographers described the area in terms that would be familiar to modern visitors, noting the flat terrain, the scarcity of fresh water, and the importance of the natural harbours for maritime trade. They also commented on the local inhabitants' remarkable skill at navigation, describing pilots who could find their way across the featureless waters of the Persian Gulf using only the stars and their intimate knowledge of currents and winds. The name Kuwait itself derives from the Arabic word kut, meaning fortress or small fort, with the diminutive suffix wait, making it little fortress. This etymology reflects the practical nature of early settlement. People built small defensive positions to protect their wells and trading posts, because even in ancient times, good real estate was worth defending. The linguistic evolution of the name tells its own story. Kut became Kuwait through the natural processes of language change, with the diminutive form expressing both affection and the modest scale of early settlements. It's the sort of name that suggests a community that knew its limitations but was determined to make the most of its advantages. By the 1st century CE, the area was well established as part of the maritime trading network that connected the Roman Empire with India and the Far East. Roman coins found in archaeological excavations testify to the importance of this trade, while Roman writers describe the Persian Gulf as a crucial highway for luxury goods flowing westward. Ships would stop at various points along the Kuwait coast to take on fresh water, repair their vessels, and trade with local merchants who had developed sophisticated systems for storing and distributing goods. The Romans, with their typical efficiency, established a system of coastal beacons and small forts to protect their shipping routes, an ancient version of maritime traffic control, though presumably with fewer complaints about delayed departures and considerably more concern about pirates. The Sassanid Empire, based in present-day Iran, also recognized Kuwait's strategic importance and maintained a significant presence in the region from approximately the 3rd to the 7th centuries CE. They viewed the Kuwait coast as a crucial link in their own trading networks and invested considerable resources in developing port facilities and defensive installations. The Sassanids were particularly interested in controlling the flow of luxury goods, silk from China, spices from India, and precious stones from Ceylon, that passed through these waters on their way to European markets. Their influence can still be traced in archaeological remains, including distinctive pottery styles and architectural techniques that would influence local building traditions for centuries to come. One of the most significant early settlements in the Kuwait region was located on Failaka Island, situated about 20 kilometers offshore in Kuwait Bay. This island, roughly 24 kilometers long and 6 kilometers wide, has been continuously inhabited for over 4,000 years, making it one of the most important archaeological sites in the entire Persian Gulf region. The Greeks established a colony there in the 3rd century BCE. Naming it Ikaros after the Greek island it apparently resembled, though one suspects the comparison was made by someone who had been at sea for far too long and was feeling homesick. The Greek settlement on Failaka was part of the broader Hellenistic expansion that followed Alexander the Great's conquests, representing one of the easternmost outposts of Greek civilization. Failaka Island served as a vital way station for merchants travelling between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, offering fresh water, supplies, and a safe harbour in what could be treacherous waters. Archaeological excavations have revealed a remarkable succession of civilizations. Bronze Age settlements with evidence of Dilmun cultural influence, Hellenistic temples dedicated to Greek gods, early Christian churches with beautiful mosaic floors, and Islamic fortifications that controlled access to the inner Gulf. The island functioned rather like an ancient truck stop, except instead of selling questionable sandwiches and energy drinks, it offered fresh water, dates, fish, and protection from both storms and pirates. The discovery of cuneiform tablets on Failaka has provided fascinating insights into ancient trade practices and daily life. These clay records detail transactions involving everything from dates and textiles to exotic animals and precious metals, offering a window into a commercial world that was far more sophisticated than one might expect. One particularly charming tablet records a complaint about a shipment of inferior copper, proving that customer service issues are truly timeless, even 4,000 years ago. Someone was writing a strongly worded letter about a disappointing purchase. Another tablet records the purchase of a parrot, suggesting that even in ancient times, people were willing to invest in exotic pets that would probably prove more trouble than they were worth. Chapter 2: Islamic Conquest and Early Development. As we settle deeper into our journey through Kuwait's past, we must witness one of history's most dramatic turning points. The moment when the old world of Persian empires gave way to the dynamic force of Islamic expansion. This transformation would reshape not just Kuwait, but the entire fabric of Middle Eastern civilization. Rather like watching a master chef completely reinvent a traditional recipe, except this particular dish would feed millions, and the cooking process took several centuries. By the early 7th century, the mighty Sassanid Empire was showing serious signs of wear and tear. After 4 centuries of ruling from modern-day Iran to the shores of Kuwait, the empire had become something of an exhausted giant, weighed down by constant warfare with the Byzantine Empire, internal political chaos, and an increasingly unhappy population groaning under heavy taxation. It was rather like an aging prizefighter who had won too many fights but taken too many punches, still standing, but swaying ominously in the ring. The Sassanid Empire had controlled the Kuwait region since 224 CE, incorporating it into their complex administrative system as part of what they called Meshan, an alternative name for the Kingdom of Kerosene. The Persians had developed the region as a crucial link in their maritime trading network, bringing with them their sophisticated systems of governance, their Zoroastrian religion, and their remarkably efficient tax collection methods. Archaeological evidence reveals a thriving Persian presence throughout Kuwait. The discovery of a Zoroastrian Tower of Silence in northern Akaz demonstrates how thoroughly Persian religious practices had penetrated the area. Failaka Island showed clear evidence of late Sassanid settlements, complete with the distinctive torpedo jar pottery that seems to have been the ancient equivalent of standardized shipping containers. The Persian administrative system in Kuwait was both sophisticated and extractive. The empire's social hierarchy divided society into 4 rigid classes: priests, warriors, secretaries, and commoners, with the vast majority of Kuwait's inhabitants falling into the latter category and bearing the primary burden of financing the empire's expensive military campaigns against the Byzantines. However, by the early 630s, this well-oiled Persian machine was beginning to sputter badly. The Byzantine-Sassanid War of 602 to 628 had devastated both empires, draining treasuries and leaving populations exhausted. When the war ended with the assassination of Persian King Khosrow II in 628, the Sassanid Empire plunged into a brutal civil war with 10 different claimants fighting for the throne over 4 years. By the time Yazdegerd III restored order in 632, the empire was a shadow of its former self. Into this power vacuum came the United Arab Tribes of the Arabian Peninsula, recently organized under Islam by the Prophet Muhammad. The death of Muhammad in 632 had initially threatened to fragment this movement, as various tribes attempted to withdraw their allegiance in the Ridda Wars. However, the first caliph, Abu Bakr, proved remarkably determined, successfully reuniting the Arabian Peninsula and then setting his sights on the rich territories beyond Arabia's borders. The expansion beyond Arabia was both ideologically and practically motivated. Islam taught the concept of jihad, striving in the path of God, which could include military expansion to spread the faith. More practically, directing the energies of the newly united Arab tribes toward external expansion was considerably safer than allowing them to turn on each other. The wealthy Persian and Byzantine territories offered tempting targets, weakened by their long conflict. The first attacks into Sassanid territory began with a tribal chief named Muthanna ibn Harith al-Shaybani, who launched successful raids into Mesopotamian territories from his base near the Persian border. These successes demonstrated Persian vulnerability and encouraged Abu Bakr to authorize more systematic military campaigns under Khalid ibn al-Walid, a military genius known as Saif Allah al-Maslul, the drawn sword of God. Khalid was something of a military prodigy, combining tactical brilliance with an almost supernatural ability to appear where his enemies least expected him. He had the sort of strategic mind that could look at a map and immediately spot opportunities that escaped lesser generals, rather like a chess grandmaster who could see victory 20 moves ahead while his opponents were still trying to remember how the pieces moved. In April of 633, Khalid launched his campaign with approximately 18,000 troops, targeting Persian-controlled territory, including the important port of Uballa and the strategic settlement of Kazma in Kuwait Bay. The Persians, under General Hormizd, assembled a formidable army to meet this threat. The confrontation that would determine Kuwait's future took place near Kazma in April of 633, in what became known as the Battle of Chains or Dat al-Salasil. This battle earned its name from a peculiar Persian tactic. Soldiers literally chained themselves together in battle lines, creating an unbreakable wall of shields and spears. The psychological logic was sound. Men unable to retreat would fight with desperate determination. The chain tactic had worked well previously, creating formations that stood like a rock in the face of enemy assault. However, like many defensive strategies that work until they don't, the chains had one catastrophic weakness. If the formation broke or was forced to retreat, the chained soldiers became trapped in their own defensive measure. It was rather like building an impregnable fortress with no exits. Khalid quickly recognized both the strength and fatal flaw of the Persian strategy. Rather than launching frontal assaults against chained formations, he employed Arab cavalry mobility to outflank Persian positions. The Arabs, accustomed to desert warfare and mounted combat, could strike at Persian flanks and withdraw before the heavily armoured, immobile Persian infantry could respond effectively. The battle raged for several days, with chained Persian formations initially holding firm. However, once Khalid's forces broke through at key points, the Persian advantage became a death trap. Unable to retreat or reform their lines, the chained soldiers were systematically overwhelmed. Hormizd was killed in the fighting, along with a substantial portion of his army. Arab chroniclers claimed they collected so many chains from the battlefield they had enough metal to forge weapons for future campaigns. The Battle of Chains was more than military victory. It symbolically ended Persian power in Kuwait and began Islamic rule that continues today. The psychological impact was enormous. The mighty Sassanid Empire had been defeated by what Persians had dismissed as desert nomads. News of Hormizd's defeat sent shockwaves throughout the Persian Empire and encouraged further Arab advances. Following victory at Kazma, Arab forces quickly consolidated control over Kuwait. The Persian administrative structure collapsed, replaced by Islamic governance that was initially more flexible and often more tolerant. The Arabs were generally content to accept local submission without requiring immediate conversion, provided populations paid the jizya tax and acknowledged Islamic political authority. The transformation under early Islamic rule was remarkably swift. The settlement known to Persians as part of Meshan became the city of Kazma, taking its name from the Arabic word for water well, reflecting both the settlement's most valuable resource and the practical nature of its new rulers. Kazma quickly developed into an important way station for travellers moving between Iraq and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Kazma's position made it ideal for the Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca. Pilgrims from Persia, Mesopotamia, and northern regions would stop in Kazma to rest, resupply, and prepare for their journey across the Arabian Peninsula. This pilgrim traffic brought both religious significance and economic prosperity, establishing Kuwait's role in the broader Islamic world. The settlement also became an important link in the expanding Islamic trading network. The same geographic advantages that had attracted Persian administrators made it valuable to Islamic merchants rapidly expanding throughout conquered territories. Ships from India, Southeast Asia, and the Far East would stop in Kazma to trade with overland caravans heading north to Baghdad and Damascus. The early Islamic period saw significant cultural and religious changes, though these were generally gradual rather than revolutionary. Existing Christian communities, particularly Nestorian Christians who had established churches and settlements in the region, were granted dhimmi status under Islamic law. This meant they could continue practicing their religion in exchange for special taxes and certain legal restrictions. Archaeological evidence suggests Christian communities continued flourishing in Kuwait well into the 9th century. Excavations at Akaz and Al-Qusur have revealed Christian churches, monasteries and agricultural settlements that operated under Islamic rule for centuries. These discoveries reveal a complex process of gradual cultural transformation rather than immediate Islamization. Zoroastrian communities left by the Persian administration faced different challenges. While theoretically entitled to dhimmi status as followers of a revealed religion, many Zoroastrian priests and administrators chose conversion to Islam rather than accept the diminished status and additional taxation. This conversion was often pragmatic rather than spiritual, a way of maintaining social position under the new regime. One remarkable aspect of early Islamic transformation was the smooth integration of existing administrative and commercial systems. The Arabs, despite military prowess, had limited experience with complex urban administration and maritime commerce. Rather than reinventing these systems, they wisely adapted existing Persian and Byzantine practices to serve Islamic purposes. During this period, Kuwait became home to Al-Farazdak, born in Kazma in the mid-7th century. Al-Farazdak became one of the most celebrated poets of early Islam, known for satirical verses and bitter literary feuds. His fame spread throughout the Islamic world, bringing recognition to his birthplace and establishing Kuwait's early reputation as a centre of Arabic literary culture. Al-Farazdak's poetry provides glimpses into life in early Islamic Kuwait, describing a society simultaneously connected to the broader Islamic world and proud of local Bedouin traditions. He wrote about the harsh desert beauty, tribal honour, trade and travel, and the gradual transformation under Islamic influence. His work serves as a poetic documentary of Kuwait's transition from Persian province to Islamic city-state. Kuwait's economic foundations during early Islam built on the same pillars that had supported the region throughout history: maritime trade, fishing, and harvesting marine resources. However, Islamic rule brought new opportunities through the unification of vast territories under Islamic political control, creating unprecedented long-distance trade possibilities with standardized commercial frameworks. The pearl diving industry, which would later become Kuwait's primary pre-oil wealth source, began developing systematically during this period. The Persian Gulf's pearl beds had been exploited for millennia, but Islamic rule brought more organized operations. Kuwaiti divers, with intimate knowledge of local waters and weather patterns, became renowned throughout the Islamic world for their skill in bringing up the finest pearls from the deepest waters. As the 7th and 8th centuries progressed, Kuwait found itself increasingly integrated into the expanding Islamic Empire. The Umayyad Caliphate in Damascus, and later the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, both recognized Kuwait's strategic and commercial importance. The region became part of sophisticated administrative networks connecting it to great Islamic cities from Cairo to Islamic Spain. This integration brought both opportunities and responsibilities. Kuwait became a regular stop for official messengers and diplomatic missions, requiring increasingly sophisticated urban infrastructure and administrative capabilities. What had begun as a modest trading settlement was evolving into a genuine city with all the complexities that implied. By the end of the 8th century, Kuwait's transformation from Persian outpost to Islamic city was complete. The Battle of Chains had been the dramatic turning point, but the real transformation occurred gradually over more than a century of Islamic rule. The Kuwait that emerged was recognizably Islamic in legal, cultural, and religious orientation. yet retained the commercial energy and strategic importance that had characterized the region throughout its history. The stage was now set for the next chapter, the rise of the Al-Sabah dynasty and Kuwait's emergence as an independent political entity. Chapter 3: The Al-Sabah dynasty and pearl diving era. As our story flows from the Islamic transformation of Kuwait into its golden age of independence, we encounter one of history's most remarkable political ascensions, the rise of a family that would transform a modest fishing settlement into a thriving commercial empire. The Al-Sabah dynasty's story begins not with conquest or inheritance, but with something far more mundane yet profound. A group of people looking for water in the desert and finding, quite by accident, the perfect place to build a nation. The early 18th century found the Arabian Peninsula in a state of environmental crisis. A devastating drought had gripped the interior regions for years, turning fertile grazing lands into barren wastelands and forcing entire tribal confederations to abandon their ancestral territories. Among those caught in this ecological catastrophe were the Bani Utub, a federation of Arab families belonging to the powerful Anazar tribe. The name Utub itself derives from the Arabic phrase Atabu ila al-Shimal, meaning they move to the north, which perfectly captures the essence of their desperate migration story. The Bani Utub had originally lived in Al-Aflaj, in what is now central Saudi Arabia, where they had prospered as pastoralists and small-scale traders. However, the great drought of the late 17th and early 18th centuries made their traditional way of life impossible. Like so many others before and since, they faced the fundamental choice that has driven human migration throughout history: move or perish. They chose to move, though their journey would prove considerably more circuitous than they initially anticipated, rather like following a GPS system programmed by someone with a very poor sense of direction and an unfortunate fondness for scenic routes. The Utub migration was not a single dramatic exodus, but rather a series of movements over several decades as different family groups searched for suitable new homes. Some initially travelled south, hoping to find better conditions in the Yemen region, but discovered that the drought had affected those areas as well. Others moved toward the Persian Gulf coast, where at least water was abundant, even if it happened to be salty and not immediately useful for drinking or agriculture. Around 1700, several Utub families established themselves in Zubara, on the western coast of the Qatar Peninsula. Zubara was strategically located for maritime trade and offered access to pearl beds, but it proved to be something of a challenging neighbourhood. The settlement was subject to attacks from various tribal groups, the climate was harsh even by Gulf standards, and the political situation remained unstable. After several decades of trying to make Zubara work, many of the Utub families concluded that they needed to find somewhere with better security and more promising economic prospects. It was during this period of renewed searching that scouts from the Utub Confederation discovered the small settlement on Kuwait Bay. The area was sparsely populated, controlled rather loosely by the Bani Khalid tribe, and offered several compelling advantages. Most importantly, there were freshwater springs, those precious Kuwait wells that would eventually give the settlement and nation their name. The bay provided an excellent natural harbour, protected from the worst Gulf storms while offering easy access to shipping routes. The pearl beds offshore appeared promising, and the existing population seemed both small and relatively welcoming. According to the most widely accepted tradition, the Al-Sabah family arrived in Kuwait around 1613, though some sources suggest the actual settlement may have taken place somewhat later, in the early to mid-1700s. The precise dating matters less than the remarkable fact that Sheikh Mubarak Al-Sabah, writing to British officials in 1913, could claim that Kuwait is a land of the poor in which our grandfather Al-Sabah dwelled in 1613. Whether this represented literal chronological accuracy or a bit of dynastic myth-making, it demonstrates how firmly the Al-Sabah family had rooted their identity in the Kuwait settlement by the 20th century. The early years of Utub settlement in Kuwait were marked by a delicate balance between cooperation and competition among the three dominant families, the Al-Sabah, the Al-Khalifa, and the Al-Jalama. Each family brought different skills and resources to the new settlement. The Al-Sabah were known for their diplomatic abilities and skill at mediating disputes, talents that would prove crucial in the fractious world of Gulf politics. The Al-Khalifa and Al-Jalama were noted for their maritime expertise and commercial connections, essential for developing Kuwait's trading potential. Initially, the three families agreed to share power and responsibility in the new settlement. This arrangement worked reasonably well during the early decades of the 18th century, as there was plenty of work to be done in establishing the settlement and developing its economic base. However, as Kuwait grew more prosperous and the stakes increased, tensions began to emerge among the leading families. These tensions came to a head around 1756, when the time came to formalize the settlement's leadership structure. The selection of Sabah ibn Jaber as Kuwait's first ruler around 1752 to 1756 was not the result of inheritance or conquest, but rather a democratic choice made by the prominent families of the Utub Confederation. This selection process was remarkably practical and forward-thinking for its time. The families needed someone who could manage the increasingly complex task of governing a growing commercial settlement, mediating disputes between different groups, and representing Kuwait's interests in dealings with external powers. Sabah ibn Jaber possessed the crucial combination of personal qualities that the situation demanded. He was respected by all the major families, known for his fairness and diplomatic skill, and understood both the commercial and security challenges facing the settlement. Perhaps most importantly, he was seen as someone who would rule in the interests of the community as a whole rather than favouring his own family's narrow concerns. Though this last point would prove to be a source of ongoing tension throughout Dynasty's history. Sabah's rule from approximately 1752 to 1764 established the fundamental patterns that would characterize Al-Sabah governance for centuries to come. He ruled through consultation with the merchant families and tribal leaders, maintained Kuwait's commercial focus while building adequate defenses, and skillfully navigated the complex regional politics that surrounded the small settlement. His approach was pragmatic rather than ideological. He was less concerned with grand political theories than with making sure that Kuwait's ships could sail safely, its merchants could trade profitably, and its residents could sleep peacefully at night. The most significant challenge facing Sabah and his immediate successors was the development of Kuwait's pearl diving industry, which would become the foundation of the settlement's prosperity for the next 2 centuries. Pearl diving in the Persian Gulf was not new. There is archaeological evidence of pearl harvesting dating back thousands of years, but the systematic development of the industry during the 18th and 19th centuries transformed it into something approaching a modern commercial enterprise. The Persian Gulf was particularly blessed with pearl oysters, specifically the species Pinctada radiata, which produced pearls of exceptional quality and lustrous beauty. These Gulf pearls were prized throughout the ancient and medieval worlds, coveted by everyone from Mesopotamian kings to Roman emperors to Chinese court officials. The pearls were particularly valued for their distinctive creamy white colour and brilliant lustre, qualities that made them stand out even among the world's finest natural pearls. However, pearl diving was an extraordinarily dangerous and demanding occupation, requiring skills and courage that few possessed. divers had to descend to depths of 40 feet or more without any breathing apparatus, locate pearl oysters on the sea floor, collect as many as possible, and surface before their lungs gave out. A skilled diver might manage 40 or 50 such dives in a single day during the peak season, each one carrying the risk of drowning, shark attack, or decompression sickness. The pearl diving season, known as Guz al-Kabir, typically lasted from June through September, coinciding with the calmest weather and clearest waters. During these months, Kuwait's entire economic and social life revolved around the pearl fleet. Families would gather at the harbour to see off the diving crews with elaborate ceremonies and prayers for safe return. The settlement would take on an almost ghost town quality as most of the adult men departed for weeks or months at sea. The social structure of pearl diving reflected both the democratic traditions of Bedouin society and the harsh economic realities of maritime commerce. Each diving vessel, called a sambuk or boom, was owned by a merchant sponsor who provided the boat, equipment and supplies for the voyage. The crew was led by a captain called a nakuda, who served as navigator, dive master and commercial representative. The divers themselves were typically young men from poorer families, attracted by the possibility of substantial rewards but often trapped in cycles of debt to the boat owners. Despite its dangers and hardships, pearl diving created a remarkably sophisticated commercial network that connected Kuwait to markets across Asia, Europe and North Africa. Kuwait's pearl merchants developed trading relationships with buyers in Bombay, Baghdad, Istanbul and even London and Paris. The finest pearls commanded extraordinary prices. A single perfect specimen might sell for enough money to buy a house, making pearl diving something like an underwater lottery with very long odds but spectacular potential payoffs. The success of Kuwait's pearl industry during the Al-Sabah period was not merely a matter of natural resources, but reflected the dynasty's skill at creating favourable conditions for commerce. The Al-Sabah rulers maintained security for the pearl fleet, negotiated agreements with neighbouring powers to ensure safe passage for Kuwait's ships, and established legal frameworks for resolving commercial disputes. They also invested heavily in harbour infrastructure, ensuring that Kuwait Bay remained the best port facility in the region. By the early 19th century, Kuwait had become one of the Persian Gulf's most important commercial centres, with a pearl fleet numbering in the hundreds of vessels and employing thousands of divers, crew members and support personnel. The town itself had grown from a few hundred inhabitants to several thousand, with substantial merchant houses, a thriving market, and defensive walls that reflected both the settlement's prosperity and the ongoing security challenges of the region. The Al-Sabah dynasty's political evolution during this period reflected the growing complexity of Kuwait's position in regional and international affairs. Sheikh Abdullah I, who succeeded his father Sabah ibn Jaber around 1762, ruled for more than 50 years and oversaw Kuwait's emergence as a significant regional power. His long reign allowed for remarkable continuity in policy and the development of institutional structures that would serve Kuwait well in later decades. Abdullah I faced numerous external challenges during his rule, including pressure from the Ottoman Empire, conflicts with neighbouring tribal groups, and the disruptive effects of various regional wars. His response was typically pragmatic. He made whatever alliances seemed most beneficial to Kuwait at any given time, paid tribute when necessary to maintain peace, and fought when Kuwait's vital interests were at stake. His policy might best be described as enlightened opportunism. He was willing to be flexible on matters of pride and ideology, but utterly uncompromising when it came to protecting Kuwait's commercial interests, political autonomy. One of Abdullah's most significant achievements was the expansion of Kuwait's trading networks beyond the traditional pearl and fishing industries. Under his rule, Kuwait became an important transit point for goods moving between India and the Ottoman Empire, as well as a significant centre for date cultivation and export. This economic diversification helped reduce Kuwait's dependence on the unpredictable pearl market and provided alternative sources of income during years when pearl diving proved less profitable. The Al Khalifa and Al Jalamar families, meanwhile, had grown increasingly dissatisfied with their subordinate role in Kuwait's political structure. Around 1766, tensions came to a head over Kuwait's involvement in a conflict with the Bani Kab tribe from the Iranian coast. The dispute, which may have originated in a refused marriage proposal, or more likely in commercial rivalries and piracy issues, led to a military confrontation that the Al Khalifa and Al Jalama opposed. Rather than continue to work within Kuwait's political framework, both families decided to leave the settlement and seek their fortunes elsewhere. The Al Khalifa eventually established themselves in Bahrain, where they founded the dynasty that still rules the island kingdom today. The Al Jalama settled in various locations throughout the Gulf region. Their departure simplified Kuwait's internal politics by eliminating the most serious challenges to Al-Sabah authority, though it also deprived the settlement of experienced maritime and commercial expertise. The period from the late 18th through the mid-19th centuries represented the golden age of Kuwait's pearl-based prosperity. The industry reached its peak during the reign of Sheikh Jabir, the first 1812 to 1859, when Kuwait's pearl fleet reportedly included nearly 800 vessels employing tens of thousands of crew members and divers. The wealth generated by this maritime empire transformed Kuwait from a small fishing village into one of the Gulf's most important commercial centres. However, even during this golden age, perceptive observers could see signs that the pearl industry's dominance might not last forever. The dangerous working conditions and debt-based labour system created ongoing social tensions. International competition was increasing as other regions developed their own pearl diving operations. Most ominously, there were persistent rumours of experiments in Japan aimed at creating artificial pearls, which, if successful, could destroy the natural pearl market overnight. Chapter 4: British Protectorate and Modern Foundations. As the 19th century drew to a close, Kuwait found itself navigating increasingly treacherous waters in the complex world of international politics. The same strategic location that had made the small emirate prosperous now made it a coveted prize for the great powers of the age. Sheikh Mubarak Al-Sabah, who would become known to history as Mubarak the Great, faced a challenge that would test both his political acumen and his willingness to make difficult choices about Kuwait's future independence. The Ottoman Empire, that vast and creaking imperial structure that had dominated the Middle East for centuries, he was experiencing what historians politely call administrative challenges, but which might be more accurately described as a slow-motion collapse. The empire's attempts to assert greater control over its Arab provinces had intensified during the late 19th century, as Ottoman officials recognized that their grip on these territories was loosening. Kuwait, with its strategic location and growing commercial importance, had become a particular focus of Ottoman attention. Sheikh Mohammed Al-Sabah, who had ruled Kuwait from 1892 to 1896, had pursued what might charitably be called a pro-Ottoman policy, though it was more accurately described as a policy of trying to avoid trouble by accommodating Ottoman demands. His approach had the support of his brother-in-law, Yusuf ibn Abdullah al-Ibrahim, who served as something of a power behind the throne and maintained close ties with Ottoman officials in Baghdad and Basra. This policy of accommodation had created considerable tension within Kuwait's merchant community, who viewed Ottoman taxation and commercial regulations as threats to their prosperous trading operations. The merchants had not spent decades building Kuwait into a commercial empire, only to see their profits diverted to Istanbul to finance Ottoman military adventures in distant parts of the empire. The situation was rather like a successful family business being told that a distant and financially irresponsible relative would now be managing their accounts. The crisis came to a head on May 17, 1896, when Sheikh Mubarak al-Sabah assassinated his half-brother Muhammad and seized power in what was, by any standard, a violent and decisive coup. The assassination was carried out with typical Al-Sabah efficiency. Muhammad was killed while he slept, along with his brother Jarrah, eliminating any immediate threats to Mubarak's succession. It was the sort of political transition that would have made Machiavelli nod approvingly, though it certainly complicated Kuwait's diplomatic relationships. Mubarak's seizure of power was motivated by more than personal ambition, though ambition certainly played a role. He recognized that Kuwait's continued prosperity and independence required a fundamental shift in policy away from Ottoman accommodation toward a strategy that would preserve the Emirates' commercial autonomy while providing adequate security against external threats. The question was how to accomplish this without triggering Ottoman military intervention that could destroy everything the Al-Sabah dynasty had built. The answer came from an unexpected direction: the British Empire, which had been quietly extending its influence throughout the Persian Gulf region as part of its broader strategy to protect the routes to India. British officials had been watching developments in Kuwait with considerable interest, recognizing the Emirates' potential value as both a commercial partner and a strategic asset in the increasingly complex Great Game being played out across the Middle East. The British had already established protectorate relationships with several of the smaller Gulf Emirates, offering protection and commercial advantages in exchange for exclusive access and control over foreign policy. This system had worked well for both sides. The local rulers maintained their internal autonomy while gaining security guarantees, while the British gained strategic positions and commercial opportunities without the expense and complications of direct colonial administration. Captain Malcolm John Meade, the British political resident in the Persian Gulf, had been authorised by London to explore the possibility of a similar arrangement with Kuwait. Mubarak's coup provided the perfect opportunity for such negotiations, as the new ruler desperately needed external support to legitimize his position and defend against potential Ottoman retaliation. The negotiations between Mubarak and Meade were conducted in absolute secrecy, for obvious reasons. If the Ottomans had learned of British involvement in Kuwait's affairs, they might well have launched a military intervention that would have ended Kuwait's independence permanently. The talks took place during late 1898 and early 1899, with both sides carefully weighing the advantages and risks of a formal alliance. On January 23, 1899, Mubarak and Meade signed the Anglo-Kuwaiti Agreement, a document that would shape Kuwait's political future for the next 62 years. The agreement was elegantly simple in its terms, but profound in its implications. Mubarak pledged that he and his successors would never sell, lease, mortgage, or cede any portion of Kuwait's territory to any foreign power without British consent. They also agreed not to receive foreign agents or representatives without prior British approval. In exchange, Britain promised to pay the Al-Sabah rulers an annual subsidy of 15,000 Indian rupees, approximately £1,500 sterling, and to protect Kuwait against external threats. More importantly, Britain pledged to respect Kuwait's internal autonomy, allowing the Al-Sabah family to continue governing according to their traditional methods while providing the security guarantee that would deter Ottoman intervention. The agreement was kept secret for several months, allowing Mubarak to consolidate his position internally before revealing his new international alignment. When the treaty was finally made public in September 1899, it created something of a diplomatic sensation. The Ottoman Empire protested vigorously, claiming that Kuwait remained an integral part of their empire and that Britain had no right to interfere in Ottoman internal affairs. The British response was typically understated but firm. British officials pointed out that they maintained friendly relations with Sheikh Mubarak and would view any attempt to establish Turkish authority in Kuwait as a disturbance of the regional status quo. This diplomatic language, translated roughly as "try it and find out what happens," delivered with characteristic British politeness and implacable determination. The immediate result was the First Kuwaiti Crisis, a tense standoff between British and Ottoman forces in the Gulf region. Britain deployed gunboats along the Kuwaiti coast, while Ottoman officials made increasingly threatening statements about their intention to restore their authority over Kuwait. For several months, war seemed possible as both empires prepared for a confrontation that could have spread far beyond the Gulf region. Ultimately, the Ottomans backed down rather than risk a war with the British Empire at a time when they were facing multiple internal and external challenges. The crisis established the practical reality of British protection for Kuwait, while leaving the legal status of the relationship deliberately ambiguous, a sort of diplomatic fudge that allowed both sides to claim victory while avoiding immediate conflict. Under British protection, Kuwait experienced unprecedented prosperity during the first decade of the 20th century. Mubarak proved to be a remarkably effective ruler, combining the traditional Al-Sabah skills at commerce and diplomacy with a new level of political sophistication made possible by his alliance with the world's dominant maritime power. The emirate became known as the Marseille of the Gulf because of its economic vitality and cosmopolitan character. The population of Kuwait grew rapidly during this period, attracting merchants, craftsmen and workers from throughout the Persian Gulf region. The city's commercial district expanded dramatically, with new markets, warehouses and residential areas reflecting the increasing prosperity of the pearl trade and related commercial activities. Mubarak invested oil revenues in harbour improvements, defensive walls, and other infrastructure projects that enhanced Kuwait's commercial capabilities. However, even during this golden age, perceptive observers could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The international pearl market was showing signs of instability as new competitors entered the field and changing fashion trends affected demand. More ominously, Japanese experiments with cultured pearl production were beginning to yield practical results that threatened to revolutionize the entire industry. World War I brought new challenges and opportunities for Kuwait. The Ottoman Empire's decision to join the Central Powers placed Mubarak in the somewhat awkward position of being allied with Britain while nominally remaining an Ottoman subject. His solution was characteristically pragmatic. He provided discreet assistance to British military operations in the region while maintaining plausible deniability about his level of involvement. Kuwaiti merchants and sailors provided valuable services to the British war effort, serving as guides, suppliers and intelligence sources for military operations in Mesopotamia. Kuwait's strategic location made it an ideal staging area for British advances toward Baghdad and Basra, while its commercial networks provided access to information about Ottoman military movements and capabilities throughout the region. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I fundamentally altered Kuwait's international position. The Anglo-Ottoman Convention of 1913 had attempted to formalize Kuwait's status as an autonomous region within the Ottoman Empire while recognizing British influence, but the war had prevented ratification of this agreement. With the Ottoman Empire's defeat and dissolution, Kuwait's legal status became a matter for British determination. Sir Percy Cox, the British High Commissioner in Baghdad, formally recognised Kuwait as an independent government under British protection in 1918, though this independence was clearly limited by the terms of the 1899 agreement. Kuwait had achieved de facto sovereignty while remaining within the British sphere of influence, a status that provided security and commercial advantages while limiting full diplomatic independence. Mubarak's death in 1915 marked the end of an era, though his successors continued the policies he had established. Sheikh Jaber II ruled briefly until 1917, followed by Sheikh Salim al-Mubarak, who faced the enormous challenge of managing Kuwait's affairs during the final years of the war and the turbulent post-war period. The 1920s brought new pressures to Kuwait, as the regional balance of power continued to shift. The emergence of Ibn Saud as the dominant force in Central Arabia created potential conflicts over territorial boundaries and tribal allegiances. The Kuwait-Najd War of 1920 to 1920 saw fierce fighting as Ibn Saud's Ikhwan warriors launched raids into Kuwaiti territory, culminating in the Battle of Jara in October 1920. The Battle of Jara demonstrated both Kuwait's military capabilities and its ultimate dependence on British support. Sheikh Salim al-Mubarak successfully defended the Jara fort against a much larger Ikhwan force, inflicting heavy casualties and forcing the raiders to withdraw. However, the victory was made possible largely by British military assistance and the presence of British warships offshore, which deterred more sustained Saudi attacks. The territorial settlement that followed the Kuwait-Najd War illustrated the extent of British control over Kuwait's foreign relations. The UK Protocol of 1922 was negotiated entirely by British officials, with Sir Percy Cox making the final decisions about Kuwait's boundaries without consulting Sheikh Ahmad al-Jaber, who had succeeded his father in 1921. Cox's decision to award 2/3 of Kuwait's claimed territory to Ibn Saud was a bitter pill for the Kuwaitis to swallow, but they were in no position to resist British judgment. The pearl industry crisis of the 1920s and 30s created the most serious challenge to Kuwait's economic foundations since the Al-Sabah dynasty had come to power. The development of cultured pearl production in Japan, combined with the global economic depression following the 1929 stock market crash, virtually destroyed the market for natural pearls. Kuwait's economy, built on centuries of pearl diving prosperity, faced potential collapse. It was during this period of economic crisis that an unexpected salvation appeared on the horizon, quite literally buried beneath Kuwait's desert sands. International oil companies had been exploring the Persian Gulf region since the early 1920s, encouraged by successful discoveries in Iran and Iraq. The black bituminous patches that had long been observed in Kuwait's desert suddenly took on new significance as potential indicators of underground oil reserves. On December 23, 1934, Sheikh Ahmad al-Jaber al-Sabah signed the first Kuwait oil concession agreement with the Kuwait Oil Company Limited, a joint venture between the Anglo-Persian Oil Company and the American Gulf Oil Corporation. The agreement granted the company exclusive rights to explore for oil throughout Kuwait's territory in exchange for annual payments and a percentage of any oil revenues discovered. The Kuwait Oil Company wasted no time in beginning exploration operations. Geological surveys were conducted throughout 1935, followed by the drilling of the first exploratory well at Bara in 1936. The results were disappointing. Bara proved to be a dry hole that yielded no commercial oil production. However, the company's geologists had identified several other promising locations, including an area near Kuwait Bay where surface indications suggested the presence of substantial underground oil reserves. On February 22nd, 1938, the company's drilling operations at the Bergen field achieved spectacular success. Oil was discovered at a depth of 3,800 feet, and the pressure was so great that the oil blasted through the wellhead valve with tremendous force. The flow was so powerful that it could not be controlled using conventional methods, requiring the creative solution of using a 60-foot wooden pole from the Kuwait City Bazaar as a temporary stopper. The discovery of the Bergen field, which remains the world's second-largest oil field, transformed Kuwait's prospects overnight. Even more oil was discovered as drilling continued, revealing reserves of unprecedented size and quality. By the end of 1938, 8 wells had been drilled in the Bergen field, all producing high-quality crude oil at remarkable rates. Chapter 5: Oil Era and Regional Challenges. The silver wheel that Sheikh Ahmad al-Jaber al-Sabah turned on June 30th, 1946, to start Kuwait's first oil export did more than open a pipeline. It opened the door to a completely transformed world. The age of petroleum had arrived in Kuwait with a subtle fanfare typical of events that change everything while appearing perfectly ordinary. It was rather like watching someone casually flip a switch that happened to illuminate an entirely new civilization. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Oil revenues began flowing into Kuwait's treasury at rates that dwarfed anything the pearl diving industry had ever produced, even during its most prosperous years. Within a decade, Kuwait had evolved from a modest trading emirate dependent on the uncertain bounty of the sea into one of the wealthiest nations per capita in the world, backed by reserves of petroleum that seemed almost inexhaustible. Sheikh Ahmad al-Jaber, who ruled until 1950, proved remarkably adept at managing this transition. He understood that oil wealth, while transformative, could also be destabilizing if not handled carefully. His approach was characteristically pragmatic. Use the new revenues to modernize Kuwait's infrastructure while maintaining the political and social institutions that had served the nation well for nearly 2 centuries. The first major investments were in basic infrastructure: roads, hospitals, schools, and expanded port facilities. Kuwait City began its transformation from a traditional Gulf trading town into a modern capital, with wide boulevards, air-conditioned buildings, and all the amenities of 20th century urban life. The contrast with the past was so stark that visitors in the 1950s often had difficulty believing they were in the same country that had been described by travellers just 20 years earlier. Sheikh Abdullah al-Salim al-Sabah, who succeeded Ahmad in 1950, faced the momentous challenge of guiding Kuwait to complete independence while managing unprecedented oil prosperity. The regional political landscape was changing rapidly as Arab nationalism gained strength throughout the Middle East, and the old British imperial system that had protected Kuwait for 60 years was clearly approaching its end. The Suez Crisis of 1956 had demonstrated the limits of British power in the Middle East, while the Iraqi Revolution of 1958 had brought a radical Republican government to power in Baghdad. The new Iraqi regime, led by General Abdul Karim Qasim, was openly hostile to traditional monarchies and made no secret of its belief that Kuwait rightfully belonged to Iraq as part of a unified Arab nation. On June 19, 1961, Sheikh Abdullah signed an exchange of notes with the British political resident that formally terminated the 1899 Anglo-Kuwaiti Agreement and granted Kuwait complete independence. It was a moment of tremendous national pride, marking the end of 62 years of British protection and the beginning of Kuwait's life as a fully sovereign nation. The celebration lasted exactly 6 days. On June 25th, General Qasim announced that Kuwait was an integral part of Iraq and belonged under Iraqi sovereignty. He declared his intention to appoint the Kuwaiti emir as a mere district governor under Iraqi administration, effectively proposing to erase Kuwait's independence almost before it had begun. Sheikh Abdullah's response was swift and decisive. He declared a state of emergency, mobilized Kuwait's small but well-equipped military, and invoked the defense provisions that had been included in the independence agreement with Britain. British forces began arriving within days. Aircraft carriers, marine commandos, and army units that quickly established defensive positions along Kuwait's northern border with Iraq. The crisis, known as Operation Vantage, represented a crucial test of both Kuwait's independence and the international community's willingness to support small nations against aggressive neighbours. Iraqi forces massed near the border, and for several weeks it appeared that full-scale war might be inevitable. However, Qasim ultimately decided not to test British military resolve directly, and the immediate threat gradually subsided. More importantly for Kuwait's long-term security, the Arab League agreed to replace British forces with an Arab peacekeeping force, demonstrating that Kuwait had significant support among its Arab neighbours. This represented a diplomatic victory of considerable importance. Kuwait had not only survived its first independence crisis but had done so with broad regional backing. The 1960s and 70s marked Kuwait's golden age of development and prosperity. Oil revenues funded massive infrastructure projects, educational expansion, and social welfare programs that made Kuwait a model for other developing nations. The government established free education through university-level, comprehensive healthcare, and housing subsidies that ensured a high standard of living for all Kuwaiti citizens. Sheikh Sabah al-Salim al-Sabah, who ruled from 1965 to 1977, oversaw the completion of Kuwait's transformation into a modern state. His reign saw the development of Kuwait's distinctive political system, which combined traditional consultation with modern parliamentary institutions. The National Assembly, established in 1963, provided a forum for public debate and legislative oversight while preserving the Al-Sabah family's executive authority. However, regional developments during the 1970s created new challenges for Kuwait's security and stability. The October War of 1973 and the subsequent oil embargo demonstrated both the power of petroleum as a political weapon and Kuwait's vulnerability to regional conflicts. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 brought a radical Islamic government to power in Tehran, fundamentally altering the balance of power in the Persian Gulf. Sheikh Jaber al-Ahmad al-Jaber al-Sabah, who became emir in 1977, faced these new challenges with characteristic Al-Sabah pragmatism. When Iraq attacked Iran in September 1980, Kuwait found itself in an extremely difficult position. The Iran-Iraq War posed direct threats to Kuwait's security while creating impossible choices about regional alignment. Iran's revolutionary government viewed Kuwait's traditional monarchical system as an obstacle to their vision of Islamic revolution throughout the region. Iranian leaders made increasingly threatening statements about Kuwait's legitimacy and actively supported subversive activities within the emirate. At the same time, Iraq's invasion of Iran had made Saddam Hussein dependent on Kuwait's support for his war effort. Kuwait's response was typically pragmatic but ultimately dangerous. The emirate provided substantial financial support to Iraq. Estimates suggest between $14 and $60 billion in loans and grants, while also serving as Iraq's primary conduit for importing military supplies and exporting oil. Kuwait essentially became Iraq's economic lifeline during the 8-year conflict. The decision to support Iraq was understandable from Kuwait's perspective. Iranian threats were direct and immediate, while Iraq, despite its aggressive rhetoric, had at least formally recognized Kuwait's independence in 1963. However, this support came at considerable cost and risk, drawing Kuwait directly into the conflict and making it a target for Iranian retaliation. The tanker war phase of the Iran-Iraq conflict, which began in earnest in 1984, directly threatened Kuwait's economic lifelines. Iranian forces attacked Kuwaiti oil tankers carrying Iraqi petroleum, while also targeting Kuwait's own oil installations and shipping. The attacks were sophisticated and persistent, using speedboats, missiles, and naval mines to disrupt shipping throughout the Persian Gulf. By 1987, the situation had become so dangerous that Kuwait requested international protection for its shipping. The United States agreed to reflag Kuwaiti tankers as American vessels, providing U.S. Navy escorts for oil shipments under Operation Earnest Will. This arrangement drew American forces directly into the Persian Gulf conflict and demonstrated Kuwait's continued dependence on great power protection. The reflagging operation was not without incident. In May 1987, an Iraqi aircraft attacked the USS Stark, apparently mistaking it for an Iranian vessel, killing 37 American sailors. In October, Iranian missiles struck the reflagged Kuwaiti tanker Sea Isle City, while it was anchored near Kuwait City. These incidents illustrated the dangerous complexity of the regional situation and Kuwait's vulnerable position. The Iran-Iraq War finally ended in August 1988, but it left Kuwait facing new challenges. Iraq emerged from the conflict victorious but economically devastated, with massive debts and a powerful military machine that needed new purposes. The war had also demonstrated the vulnerability of Gulf shipping and the ease with which regional conflicts could disrupt global energy supplies. More ominously for Kuwait, Iraq began pressing for debt forgiveness and territorial concessions as rewards for its wartime service to the Gulf states. Saddam Hussein argued that Iraq had protected the Arabian Peninsula from Iranian revolutionary expansion and deserved compensation in the form of cancelled loans and access to Kuwait's Bubiyan and Warbar Islands, which controlled approaches to Iraq's only remaining port facilities. Kuwait's refusal to forgive Iraq's wartime debts or cede territorial control created mounting tensions throughout 1989 and early 1990. Iraqi officials made increasingly threatening statements, while also accusing Kuwait of exceeding its OPEC oil production quotas and driving down petroleum prices at Iraq's expense. The accusations had some merit. Kuwait had indeed been producing above quota levels, but the aggressive tone suggested deeper intentions. The crisis came to a head during the summer of 1990. Despite mediation efforts by Saudi Arabia and other Arab leaders, negotiations between Kuwait and Iraq produced no agreements. Iraqi demands were essentially impossible for Kuwait to accept without surrendering its sovereignty, while Iraq appeared unwilling to accept any outcome that didn't provide substantial economic and territorial gains. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces crossed the border and launched a full-scale invasion of Kuwait. The attack was swift and overwhelming. Iraqi Republican Guard units reached Kuwait City within hours, while special forces secured key installations including the airport, ports and oil facilities. Kuwaiti resistance was brave but futile against such overwhelming force. The invasion shocked the international community and created the most serious crisis in the Persian Gulf since World War II. Within days, the United Nations Security Council had passed resolutions condemning the invasion and demanding immediate Iraqi withdrawal. The United States began deploying forces to Saudi Arabia to prevent further Iraqi advances, while building an international coalition to reverse the occupation. For Kuwait, the invasion meant the end of the golden age that had begun with the first oil exports in 1946. The Iraqi occupation was brutal and destructive, with widespread looting, torture and environmental sabotage. more than half of Kuwait's population fled the country, while those who remained faced systematic oppression and violence. The Kuwaiti government, led by Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmad, established itself in exile in Saudi Arabia and began a remarkable diplomatic campaign to mobilize international support for liberation. Kuwaiti officials worked tirelessly to maintain international attention on their plight, while also organizing resistance activities within the occupied emirate. The international response ultimately proved decisive. Operation Desert Storm, launched on January 17, 1991, combined the most sophisticated military technology of the late 20th century with the largest coalition force since World War II. The air campaign systematically destroyed Iraqi military capabilities, while the ground assault that began on February 24th achieved complete victory within 100 hours. However, the liberation came at enormous cost. Retreating Iraqi forces had set fire to more than 700 oil wells, creating an environmental disaster of unprecedented scope. The resulting oil fires burned for months, consuming millions of barrels of petroleum daily and creating vast clouds of toxic smoke that darkened the skies across the region. The last oil well fire was extinguished on November 6, 1991, when Sheikh Jabir himself turned off the final flame. The symbolism was profound. The same ruling family that had turned the wheel to begin Kuwait's oil age was now personally involved in ending the worst environmental disaster in the nation's history. The Gulf War had demonstrated both Kuwait's continued strategic importance and its fundamental vulnerability in an unstable region. The small emirate had survived its greatest challenge, but at enormous cost and only with massive international assistance. The post-war period would require not just physical reconstruction, but a fundamental reconsideration of Kuwait's place in the changing world order of the late 20th century. Chapter 6: Modern Kuwait and Future Horizons. The sight of Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmad turning off the final oil well fire on November 6, 1991, marked more than just the end of an environmental catastrophe. It symbolized Kuwait's emergence from its greatest trial into an uncertain but hopeful future. The small emirate that had been invaded, occupied, and systematically pillaged was now faced with the monumental task of rebuilding not just its infrastructure, but its entire vision of what Kuwait could become in the 21st century. The reconstruction period that followed was nothing short of remarkable. Within 2 years, Kuwait had restored most of its basic infrastructure, cleared the debris of war, and begun the complex process of healing a traumatized society. The financial cost was enormous. Estimates suggest that reconstruction and environmental cleanup consumed more than $60 billion, but Kuwait's accumulated oil wealth provided the resources necessary for this unprecedented recovery effort. However, the Gulf War had fundamentally altered Kuwait's strategic outlook and exposed vulnerabilities that demanded new approaches to national security and economic development. The invasion had demonstrated that even the most sophisticated military technology and international alliances could not guarantee the survival of small nations in an unpredictable world. Kuwait would need to develop new strategies for maintaining its independence while adapting to rapidly changing global conditions. The 1990s witnessed significant political developments as Kuwait grappled with questions of identity, citizenship, and democratic participation that had been intensified by the war experience. The National Assembly, suspended during the occupation, was restored and expanded its role in national governance. Parliamentary elections in 1992 brought new voices into Kuwait's political system, including opposition figures who had been critical of the government's pre-war policies. These political changes reflected deeper social transformations within Kuwaiti society. The shared experience of occupation and resistance had created new bonds among citizens, while also raising difficult questions about the status of non-citizen residents who had remained in Kuwait during the occupation. The war had also highlighted the country's dependence on foreign workers and the complex demographic challenges facing a nation where citizens represented only about 30% of the total population. Sheikh Jaber al-Ahmad, who continued to rule until his death in 2006, oversaw Kuwait's gradual adaptation to the post-Cold War world order. His leadership during this period was characterized by careful diplomacy, substantial investment in education and infrastructure, and growing awareness that Kuwait's long-term prosperity would require economic diversification beyond petroleum exports. The 21st century brought new leadership and new challenges. Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmad al-Jaber al-Sabah, who became emir in 2006, proved to be a visionary leader who understood that Kuwait's future depended on its ability to transform from an oil-dependent economy into a diversified, knowledge-based society. His reign marked the beginning of ambitious reform programs that would reshape Kuwait's economic and social landscape. The global financial crisis of 2008 provided a stark reminder of Kuwait's vulnerability to international economic fluctuations. While the country's substantial sovereign wealth fund, accumulated through decades of prudent oil revenue management, cushioned the immediate impact, the crisis highlighted the urgent need for economic diversification and structural reform. Sheikh Sabah's response was characteristically ambitious. In 2010, he launched Kuwait Vision 2035, a comprehensive development strategy designed to transform the emirate into a regional financial and commercial hub while reducing dependence on hydrocarbon revenues. The plan was audacious in scope, calling for fundamental changes in Kuwait's economic structure, educational system, and social priorities. Vision 2035 established 7 strategic pillars for Kuwait's transformation: creating a sustainable, diversified economy, developing effective civil service, ensuring a sustainable living environment, building developed infrastructure, providing high-quality healthcare, nurturing creative human capital, and preserving Kuwait's Arab-Islamic identity while embracing innovation and progress. The economic diversification component of Vision 2035 was particularly ambitious. Kuwait aimed to reduce oil's contribution to gross domestic product from 95% to 60% by 2035, while simultaneously developing robust financial services, tourism, logistics, healthcare, and technology sectors. The plan called for creating over 3,500 new small businesses and attracting $32 billion in foreign investment. One of the most spectacular elements of this transformation was the planned construction of Madinat al-Harir, or Silk City, a massive development project designed to create a new urban centre that would serve as the economic heart of Kuwait's diversified economy. The centrepiece of Silk City would be the Burj Mubarak Al-Kabir, a tower designed to be among the world's tallest buildings and a symbol of Kuwait's 21st century ambitions. Educational reform was another crucial component of Kuwait's modernization strategy. The country invested heavily in expanding higher education opportunities, establishing new universities and research centers, and developing partnerships with leading international institutions. The goal was to create a knowledge economy capable of competing globally while maintaining Kuwait's cultural distinctiveness. However, Vision 2035 faced significant implementation challenges. Political disagreements between the government and National Assembly slowed legislative approval of key reforms, While entrenched interests within Kuwait's economy resisted changes that threatened traditional patronage systems, the country's complex demographics also created social tensions, as economic reforms inevitably affected different groups within society in different ways. The regional upheavals that began with the Arab Spring in 2011 created additional complications for Kuwait's development plans. While Kuwait itself remained relatively stable, the conflicts and political turmoil throughout the Middle East disrupted regional trade networks, created refugee populations, and demonstrated the continued importance of traditional security concerns in national planning. Perhaps even more challenging than regional political instability were the environmental consequences of climate change, which began to manifest with alarming intensity during the 21st century's second decade. Kuwait recorded some of the highest temperatures ever measured on Earth, with thermometers reaching 54 degrees Celsius in 2016. These extreme conditions posed direct threats to human health and economic productivity, while straining the country's energy and water resources. Climate change represented an existential challenge for Kuwait that went far beyond typical environmental concerns. The country's hyper-arid climate, combined with its position as one of the world's highest per capita carbon emitters, created a situation where Kuwait was simultaneously contributing to global warming while being among the nations most vulnerable to its effects. Water scarcity emerged as a particularly acute problem. Kuwait had always depended on expensive desalination processes to meet its freshwater needs, but rising temperatures and changing weather patterns increased demand while making production more costly and energy-intensive. The country's water stress levels reached alarming proportions, while per capita water consumption remained among the world's highest. The social dimensions of climate change were equally concerning. Extreme heat affected different segments of Kuwait's population very differently, with migrant workers living in poor conditions facing far greater health risks than wealthy citizens with access to air-conditioned environments. These disparities highlighted the intersection between environmental challenges and social justice issues within Kuwaiti society. Kuwait's response to climate change has been gradual but increasingly comprehensive. The National Adaptation Plan developed in 2019 established frameworks for managing climate risks, while Kuwait committed to reducing total emissions by 7.4% by 2035. More importantly, the country began substantial investments in renewable energy, aiming to generate 22,100 megawatts of renewable power by 2030. Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, who became emir in 2020 following Sheikh Sabah's death, faced the challenge of maintaining reform momentum while managing the economic disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and fluctuating oil prices. His brief reign was marked by efforts to accelerate infrastructure projects and attract foreign investment as key components of economic diversification. The current emir, Sheikh Mishal Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, who assumed power in 2023, has demonstrated renewed commitment to implementing Vision 2035, with particular emphasis on public-private partnerships and international collaboration. His leadership has coincided with revised plans that emphasize faster delivery of critical infrastructure projects and expanded development partnerships with major global powers, including China and Japan. The demographic challenges facing modern Kuwait remain formidable, with 70% of the population consisting of non-citizens. The country must balance the economic benefits of international labour with social cohesion and national identity concerns. Youth unemployment among Kuwaiti citizens has emerged as a particular concern, reflecting broader challenges in transitioning from a public sector-dominated economy to one driven by private enterprise and innovation. Kuwait's parliamentary system continues to evolve as the country grapples with balancing traditional consultation mechanisms with modern democratic practices. Recent years have seen tensions between the executive and legislative branches over economic reforms, with some observers arguing that political gridlock has slowed necessary changes, while others contend that parliamentary oversight ensures that reforms serve broader national interests. Despite these challenges, Kuwait has made remarkable progress in several key areas. The country's sovereign wealth fund has grown to become one of the world's largest, providing financial security and investment resources for future generations. Kuwait's healthcare system has achieved international recognition for quality and accessibility, while educational opportunities have expanded dramatically since the 1990s. The development of Kuwait's financial sector has been particularly impressive, with Kuwait City emerging as a significant regional financial centre. The country's banks and investment institutions have developed sophisticated capabilities that serve not only domestic needs but also provide services throughout the Middle East and beyond. Infrastructure development has proceeded rapidly in recent years, with major projects including the new Kuwait International Airport Terminal, expanded port facilities, and comprehensive urban development programs. These investments have improved quality of life for residents, while creating the physical foundations necessary for economic diversification. Cultural preservation has remained a priority, even as Kuwait embraces modernization and globalization. Traditional architecture influences contemporary building design, while heritage sites receive careful restoration and protection. The balance between preserving Kuwaiti identity and engaging with global culture reflects the country's pragmatic approach to managing change. Looking toward the future, Kuwait faces both tremendous opportunities and significant challenges. The country's strategic location, accumulated wealth, and educated population provide strong foundations for continued development, while its small size and political flexibility offer advantages in adapting to changing global conditions. The success of Vision 2035 will ultimately depend on Kuwait's ability to manage the complex transitions required for economic diversification, while maintaining social cohesion and political stability. This requires not just policy changes, but fundamental shifts in how Kuwaitis think about work, entrepreneurship, and their country's role in the global economy. Climate adaptation will continue to be a central challenge, requiring innovative approaches to urban planning, energy production, and resource management. Kuwait's experience in managing environmental challenges may provide valuable lessons for other countries facing similar climate pressures. The story of Kuwait, from ancient trading post to pearl diving centre to oil kingdom to modern diversified economy, reflects the remarkable adaptability that has characterized this small nation throughout its history. Each major transition has required Kuwait to reimagine itself while preserving the essential elements that make it distinctive. Today, as Kuwait works to implement its Vision 2035, the country is once again reinventing itself for a new era. The success of this transformation will determine not only Kuwait's prosperity, but also its ability to maintain the independence and distinctive identity that have defined this remarkable nation for more than 2 centuries. As we drift off to sleep thinking about Kuwait's journey from the shores of Kuwait Bay to the challenges of the 21st century, we might reflect on how this small nation's story illuminates larger themes of adaptation, resilience, and the delicate balance between tradition and progress that defines our modern world. Kuwait's future, like its past, will be shaped by its people's ability to navigate between competing forces while maintaining the pragmatic wisdom that has served them so well throughout their remarkable history.